Hey everyone, today I'm going to show you a comparison video of the kind of blues that I use in my palette, but due to a mishap I forgot to attach my microphone onto the camera, so please excuse the noises that you will hear, but overall it's a good video showing different qualities of the blues that I use. Hey everyone, today I've got an interesting thing to do. It's the blues that I use in general for most of the paintings. And obviously, there are more blues in the market, and some of them are quite popular, such as cerulean blue, manganese blue. But most of the time, I use these colors, and they are sufficient for me. If I need a very saturated greenish blue, then I use Prussian blue. And if I need an extreme electric kind of a color, I use this blue, which is a phthalo blue. And for argument's sake, I have just kept two almost very similar. In fact, the pigments are also similar. This is PB29. This is also PB29, and this is French ultramarine, and this is ultramarine blue. But since they are marketed separately, I have kept them in this fashion. And the most used color in my paintings is this one, which is cobalt blue. And because it's neither like too much into red or not too much nor too much into green, so it's kind of a you know like a middle color, so it can be either swayed towards violet, or easily converted into a green. So this is like a very useful color. I use it outside, I use it in most of my paintings, so very useful. So now let's check how do they behave when they're mixed with white and other colors. So let's start with Prussian blue, and since it's a very powerful color, it'll need some more white, but I'll try to show the values very closely. So this is like a very saturated color. Prussian blue, it was probably marketed in the early 18th century when the blues were very scarce and very expensive commodity as a whole. So it can create some very beautiful greenish skies. And let me dilute this color a little bit more. So let's get back to that a little later. So we can just go through all the other colors and their tints. I'm going to use the French ultramarine. This was invented 200 years ago almost in France. So this is the mass tone, and I'm going to tint it a little. When it's slightly tinted, it creates this amazingly beautiful color. This is extraordinary and has some sensory appeal, no doubt. Let's keep it as flat as possible. Now I'm going to tint it a little bit more. But when we add a bit more white to it, it tends to lose this saturation. But again, this is a very useful color, and for the last 200 years, and also since the beginning of painting or the extraction from the mines in Afghanistan, the lapis lazuli color, it has been used extensively because it's like a royalty of colors. So it's very pale now. Let me add slight amount of blue, but the color has become very pale. I'm just making it flat so that it becomes easier to view the color. But you can see that there is a clear difference between the greenishness of this color compared to this color. Obviously, it's a little bit more difficult to understand in the videography, but let's now get into this color. With this is also PB29 and will function similarly. This is a series 1 color and this is series 2 color, but they behave similarly sometimes, and the behavior of the pigment varies from manufacturer to manufacturer. I'm going to keep the value very similar to that color, so it needs slight amount of pigment. So you can see it's a very reddish color, no doubt. And there is practically any difference in between these two, and they are behaving similarly. Let's add a little bit more white and slight amount of oil. Practically there is no difference, maybe a slight amount due to pigment saturation, but it's just very difficult to understand. Now we'll go to the cobalt blue. The cobalt blue was perhaps invented during early parts of 18th century, like 300 years ago. And this is a very popular color. A lot of people have used it, impressionists have used it, and it is still being used. I am using it. So there are many artists who are using it in the world. Let's keep the value as close as possible. As you can see, this is slightly greener than this color, but when I'll be putting down the tints of this color here, it'll be looking a bit more warmer, redder than this color. And funny thing is, all of these colors, these Phthalo blue, French ultramarine, and Prussian blue, all of these are slightly on the transparent side. And this is the color which is actually opaque. So it helps in a lot of ways to paint a landscape with this color. Just use slight amount and it'll do the work very easily. So you can see it's a lot brighter than this color, but and it's slightly more easily tinted compared to that color. Here tinting power is very strong. Let's add white. When you add white, this becomes pale. These three have very little tinting strength, whereas these two, Phthalo blue and Prussian blue, they have very high tinting strength. Now let's move towards the Phthalo blue, which is like the superpower, modern day superpower blue. And it's very exciting to use one. Already you can see the strength of it. Let's add a little bit of oil. It's a very powerful color right away. Just a slight amount of Just keep the value. I think you can understand how powerful tinter it is. Now let's add white to this section. This is obviously moving towards green. Since the tinting strength is higher, it'll take a lot of white to, lighten it. Let's just use as little phthalo as possible. You can see we have got 4 layers and it's still very strong. Now let's do something differently, and we are going to add, Alizarin Crimson, which I have on top of my, palette, and mix these with it. So to understand what sort of color variation they are going to create. Now I'm going to add French Ultramarine with Alizarin Crimson, and let's see what it is being able to create. It has turned into a very beautiful violet. Now all of these colors will create a very useful violet, but let's just see what is the nature of those. They'll create some different violets, and this is ultramarine blue. I'm going to add this alizarin crimson here. Let's keep the value as close as possible. Almost very similar. So this now looks like a little bit bluer. And this is looking like very reddish. Now let's mix it with cobalt blue. Cobalt blue is an opaque pigment. Let's see how does it behave. Okay. Obviously here the violet is slightly on the lesser side compared to these, because all of these have some red in it compared to cobalt blue. So you need to add a little bit of red to make it reddish. Now let's check this out. Use a little of it. I already have some white in my brush, so that will be useful. But I am expecting that it's going to create a good, decent violet. Let's just add a bit more red. Very powerful violet, I think. keep the values together. A slight bit of white. Okay, so now I'm going to make a violet out of Prussian blue, which is the most greenish, I think. Here's Alizarin Crimson. Mixed it. Slight amount of blue, perhaps. Slight amount of red. So surprisingly, even these two colors that are slightly more on the green side, they are also creating very good purples, but not like French ultramarine and ultramarine blue and cobalt blue, but still they are very useful. So now we are going to make some greens out of these colors and check if how they behave. And I'm going to use a little amount of Prussian blue. And whoa, that's like a very powerful color. That is a beautiful color, but slightly, no, I think that's very useful color. Since these are the greenish colors, I'm going to use them. I'm again using very little. Maybe a slight amount of increase in the value. A little bit more. Let's just add a little bit of oil so that the colors can be easily visible. I think the values are very similar. Yes. Now let's create greens with French ultramarine. Now here is a very big difference. First of all, greens are not very powerful like these. And they are mostly muted in nature. Let's just add ultramarine blue to it. The colors are actually dull and more muted. Now let's add cobalt blue. I think this will create a better green, more saturated green. Yes, this is comparatively brighter than these colors. Here it needs slight amount of just add a bit more blue to it. But cobalt blue is producing a better green. Comparatively brighter. So even though all of these blues are capable of producing a good violet and decent amount of greens, but there are slight variations. So it's better to understand how in each of these colors behave with other colors while mixing.
so that we can get the best possible results. I think that's it for the day. Thank you.